The entryway to the old church was like a magical portal to his past, a grim reminder of a life he'd fought so hard to escape. He froze in place, drawing in the musty odour of decay and beeswax, amazed at how much it had changed and yet remained the same. Blinking away memories, Bobby moved deeper into the cathedral, feeling like a time traveller, each stride over the broken stained glass, sending him farther into the past. It all came flooding back, the painful memories of the thick leather belt that left welts on his back. Bobby could almost feel the slap of the plastic ruler on his knuckles with every step. He'd hated this place and all its cruelty and hardship. They tried to drain all the joy from him, and they almost succeeded. But somehow, he'd held on. He had a few happy memories of that time. Good memories of stealing church wine and getting drunk with the kids forced to work here, stolen moments of laughter with those like himself, alone in the world. With a shudder, he pushed it all away. He could not afford to be soft right now. Striding with purpose past the altar rails, he crossed himself by habit, then made his way up the low-rising stairs to the chancel, the wide stone platform that held the altar. His eyes sparkled in wonder at the beauty of late-day sunlight cascading off the stunning, textured metalwork on the walls. They were stripped of the gold and silver that once adorned them now. Everything was. Trinity Church was once considered a work of art, and despite being in ruins, it still held a certain sad beauty. Tearing his eyes away, he frowned at the rows of shattered pews that stretched to the back of the massive room. The very sight of all that wood brought an ache to his hands. He could almost smell the oil he'd used to polish the rough surfaces to smoothness. Stopping at the centre of the altar, he caressed the sleek marble surface with a shaking hand. The white and grey streaked stone had once served to proclaim the word of God, the celebration of Jesus Christ. Knowing its value, he was amazed to find it still intact, given that everything else had been scavenged or destroyed. Bobby gripped tight the edges of the cool marble, his face flush red with anger. This place had once been a masterpiece of man's love for God, and he had spent years slaving away to help restore it. Part of him wanted nothing more than to hunt down those responsible for the theft, for the defilement, and make them pay for their violation of this sacred place. The fluttering of pigeons escaping through broken stained glass pulled him back to the present, reminding him why he was here. Sighing, he stood to his full height, his whip-thin frame casting a long shadow. Reaching into the pocket of his long red coat, he pulled out a slim metal baton about the length of his forearm, steeling himself for what had to be done. "You can come out," he said, his voice echoing across the vaulted ceiling. "I can feel you there in the corner." Bobby felt her presence before seeing her. The air stilled like they were in the eye of a hurricane, and the sharp, clean smell of ozone filled his nostrils, a warning of what was to come. She emerged from a dark alcove near the back of the church, jet-black hair cascading past her shoulders, and dressed in a long, crimson leather coat over black trousers. Her uniform was a near-perfect match to his own, although she wore it better. Cautiously, he stepped out from behind the altar, mirroring her movements, making his way to the railing that separated the chancel from row after row of broken pews. As she drew closer, he could see the golden cross, which once adorned the breast of her coat, had been burned away, leaving only a charred stain in its place. "It looks like we've come full circle. This is where we met, isn't it?" she asked softly, her almond-shaped eyes narrowing, hints of anger smouldering in their dark depths. "Are you Michael's hound now?" she asked. "Is he that much of a coward that he couldn't come after us himself?" Bobby nodded along, silently agreeing with her. "Michael didn't give me much choice. You know that. Besides, who else could find you? Who else would you even talk to?" He said with a shrug, keeping his tone light. "Anyway, I was hoping I could convince you to come home, and this would be as good a place as any." "Michael died that night at Blackwood, and that thing giving you orders is not him anymore. You know that," she said through gritted teeth. "And you must be crazier than him to think we could ever come back. We know the truth now. As I said, I don't have a choice, Bobby said, bowing his head. We always have a choice, Bobby. You just have to be willing to deal with the consequences. Bobby felt that familiar itch on his brain, like an afterimage of staring at the sun too long. His gift, his enhanced senses, told him someone skulking behind him. He knew an ambush was coming, but he held out hope they could be talked down. They were friends once, and it should count for something. With a sigh, he spoke over his shoulder, his voice echoing in the vast space. Come on, Liam. I can feel you back there pottering around. You'd think that after all this time you'd know it's impossible to sneak up on me, even with your abilities, he said, returning his attention to Elizabeth, his lips pressing into a thin line. I don't sense Andrew anywhere around here. Did he go off on his own way already? He was never one for loyalty. Elizabeth scoffed, shaking her head. Don't worry, Andrew is where he needs to be. She stopped at the midpoint between the altar and the back of the church, as if there was some sort of invisible line, her eyes locking on his. You need to just let us go in peace, Bobby. Like you promised, after all we've been through. You owe us that much. Bobby strolled forward to meet her, his baton tapping against his leg. From this close he could see small arcs of static electricity dancing between her fingers, making his hair stand on end. Behind him he could sense Liam more clearly now, his anxiety, his doubt, making him quite visible despite his efforts to remain hidden. We're ascended, and have abilities beyond anything the world has ever seen, Bobby said, shaking his head. Since Blackwood people know about us, they've seen how powerful we are. They're fine with what we can do as long as they think they're in control. Once they find out you're off the leash, they'll panic and want all of us dead. The public is afraid of what it can't control, and the military won't just let you go knowing what you can do. They don't have a choice, Elizabeth shouted over him, the echoes of her voice sending more pigeons fleeing through broken, stained glass. I'm not going back. I'm going to do some good in this world with the little time I have left. If you want to keep serving assholes, you're welcome to it. Squaring his shoulders, Bobby widened his stance. Knowing her temper, he prepared for the worst. Then why did you agree to meet me here? He asked, wanting to keep her talking, to keep her calm. Her face dropped, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. This was a special place for us. When you asked to meet here, of all places, I thought you wanted to join us. Bobby felt a pang in his heart, his lips twisting into an odd smile. Slowly, without a word, he raised a hand, touching her cheek. Surprised when she let him. I wish I could. I wish things were different and we could go back to just being you and me, he whispered. But we don't have that luxury anymore. God has a plan for me, for you. Please come home. We can work this out. She put a hand over his, brushing his palm with her lips for a heartbeat before pushing it away. No, Bobby. I know what's coming now. Michael's plans for the future are insane. And I'll do everything in my power to stop him, she said, her dark eyes darting over his shoulder. I understand, I really do, he said, following her gaze. Not far behind him he could see the solid stone chancel moving as if it were a living thing. You know, Liam was always predictable, right? An idiot at the best of times. Elizabeth gave him a pained smile, rolling her eyes. I know, some things you can't change, she said, staring hard at him. She sighed, slowly backing away from him, her eyes never leaving his. Ready? Bobby pursed his lips, giving her a small salute before nodding, his heart full of regret. Liam attacked from behind, tearing away chunks of stone from the chancel and hurtling toward him like a scythe. Knowing the attacks were coming, Bobby vaulted high into the air, flipping backward and avoiding the hailstorm of razor-sharp stone that shattered against wood and concrete where he had been standing moments before. Landing farther back, he crouched, quickly twisting open his baton and releasing the monofilament whip coiled within. The invisible monomolecular line was deadly, and one of the few things that could cut through the toughened skin of an ascended. He bolted for cover, moving fast to keep them both off balance. He couldn't let them get the initiative, or he would be a dead man. He flicked his wrist, lashing out in rapid succession at Elizabeth, slicing open the flesh under her eye and another gash on her shoulder, forcing her back. She wailed, her angry shriek nearly bursting his eardrum. Crouching behind one of the pews, he closed his eyes for a heartbeat, focusing, using the strange ability he had developed since his ascension. He sensed Liam hiding behind a door that led to a small antechamber behind the altar. "There you are," he whispered, bursting into a sprint, leaping over the altar railing and landing beside the massive stone slab. Behind him, Elizabeth clutched the cut under her eye. Raising a clawed hand, she projected a torrent of blue-white electricity at him, her face a mask of anger. A wild arc of energy danced along the width of the chancel, shattering stone and forcing him to duck low behind the altar to avoid recurring blasts as she vented her rage. Arcs of lightning scattering in all directions as she walked toward him. "The next one takes your eye, little Liam," Bobby shouted with a sneer. Never having liked the smaller man very much. His commanders had told him that ascension brought out the best and worst in people, that the abilities you developed were in part based on who you were as a person. With Liam, it was pure truth. He was hard, stubborn, and inflexible. Not slowing, Bobby pulled his arm back to strike when Liam's arm shot out, fingers splayed, and jagged, razor-sharp spears of stone exploded from the floor to form a protective barrier between the two of them. Instinctively, Bobby spun his monowhip, the invisible line ripping apart the makeshift barricade like it was wet cardboard. Going on the offense, Bobby flicked the filament at Liam's face in rapid succession. Not slowing, Bobby pulled his arm back to strike when Liam's arm shot out, fingers splayed, and jagged, razor-sharp spears of stone exploded from the floor to form a protective barrier between the two of them. Instinctively, Bobby spun his monowhip, the invisible line ripping apart the makeshift barricade like it was wet cardboard. Going on the offense, Bobby flicked the filament at Liam's face in rapid succession. "The next one takes your eye, little Liam," Bobby shouted with a sneer. Never having liked the smaller man very much, his commanders had told him that ascension brought out the best and worst in people, that the abilities you developed were in part based on who you were as a person. With Liam, it was pure truth. He was hard, stubborn, and inflexible. Liam grunted as he slammed his hands together, causing the floor on either side of him to rise and snap like a steel trap, large chunks of granite moving as if alive and trapping Bobby in place. "You didn't think I could do this, did you?" Liam said, climbing to his feet, wide-eyed, his shaking arm outstretched. "My abilities have only become stronger since I've gotten away from assholes like you and Michael." He hung there, wincing in pain, his breathing short from the weight of the stone pressed against him. "You don't want to do this, Liam. You weren't at Blackwood. You don't know what happened, so you should let me go before I hurt you." Liam shook his head, a glimmer of hysteria in his eyes. "No way. I know you're just full of shit and there is nothing you can do to stop me, so save your breath." Liam closed his fist, and his prison of stone grew tighter, grinding his bones closer together with each passing moment. No, you don't understand," Bobby gasped, his breath coming in short gasps. "Please stop. I can't control it." "That's enough, Liam," Elizabeth shouted, strolling up behind him. "We said no killing, that we'd just trap him long enough to move on." "No, he always thought he was better than me. Little Liam, that's what you call me behind my back, Liam the leprechaun. Well now, little Liam is going to bury you under this church and make sure they never find you." Bobby began to see stars, his vision fading to black. From somewhere far away he could hear Elizabeth threatening, cajoling. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to stop it, or at least slow it down. He didn't want it to be like last time, like Blackwood. He knew what his rage could do. Then, without warning, it began. He was adrift in nothingness, lost somewhere between life and death, clinging to life by the tiny spark of anger that was buried deep within him. All of his life, his anger gave him the strength to survive. From losing his mother to being forced to live on the street eating garbage and beatings in this very church, anger was the one thing that sustained him. It made him who he was. Now, on the brink between life and death, he held it tight, letting it wash over him, feeding it with all he had. "I warned you," rasped Bobby, as a tendril of black and red energy snaked out from his caged form, moving like a striking viper, quick into Liam's chest. The stubborn man's eyes went wide with shock as the tendril grew, coiling around his arms and legs, swirling around his neck and forcing his jaw open and creeping its way down his throat. Bobby gasped as a burning torrent of power flooded his body, making every inch of flesh feel like it was on fire. The cuts and scrapes he'd endured closed, and he was infused with more vitality than he could endure, more life. Beyond his field of vision, another tendril shot out like a hungry serpent, drawing more power to him. Behind him, Elizabeth screamed until her voice was hoarse. In a panic, he squeezed his eyes shut, fumbling for control like a man trying to grasp a flame, desperate to smother his rage. The prison holding him vanished, and he fell hard onto the floor, momentarily seeing stars as beads of sweat rolled off his temples. "I warned you," he whispered, bounding to his feet, feeling better than he had in months. Gripping the stone slab that had held him only a few moments ago, he pushed aside the massive piece of rock like it was made of styrofoam. He marvelled at how he could still feel Elizabeth, even as she fled. It was a new sensation to him, but somehow he understood that she hadn't escaped unscathed. Just as he had drained Liam, he had touched her in some way as well, taking some of her strength and making it his own. He could almost taste her, like a shark who had smelled blood in the water. No matter how far she got, he could find her. Looking around the old church, his mind fled back to the times they spent together here. He didn't know if he had the courage to murder the last person in the world who cared about him. But he would do what he had to do and no less.